This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannan.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have an incredible historical moment right now. We are in the middle of the acceptance of the Trump peace plan, 20-point peace plan, that within the last 24 hours or so, Hamas has agreed to let go of all of the Israeli hostages, but with a condition that further negotiations and further points need to be worked out. In a brilliant political move, Hamas has basically disarmed the entire Israeli effort to basically ethnically cleanse and commit genocide in Gaza. We're going to be talking about all of the events related to the so-called peace plan, the agreement, the ceasefire, which is not really a ceasefire, and the political consequences. But before we do that, Jamal, we're going to watch an interview that you did with journalist Rayhan Uddin, who talked about Tony Blair. Tony Blair is back in the picture. His scheme to recreate Gaza as the head of the Gaza International Transitional Authority. Tony Blair has a horrible history, Jamal, as we know, in Palestine and specifically in Gaza. He's envisioning a neoliberal real estate techno bonanza with no real autonomy, authority, or respect for Palestinians as the major stakeholders or inhabitants. So this is a fantastic interview. It kind of sets the stage for our discussion, talking about what happens after the peace process.
We just to mention, there is a difference between the Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza and the leaked document that supposedly came, the Tony Blair's basically scheme that our guest spoke about. Let's watch the interview. One of the core elements of President Trump's 20-point peace plan to end the war in Gaza is the creation of a temporary transitional governance by a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. The committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace. This will be headed by President Donald J. Trump, with other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. However, Blair's unpopularity after leading the UK into war in Iraq and his subsequent failure to advance peace in his 8 years as envoy for the Middle East Quartet make him a curious choice. Joining us on Arab Talk is Rayhan Uddin. His recent article in Middle East Eye, a breakdown of Tony Blair's bizarre proposal to run Gaza. His focus is geopolitics, conflicts, and human rights. Welcome to Arab Talk, Rayhan.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it was reported that the Gaza International Transitional Authority is Tony Blair's brainchild. For those who are younger or might not know the totality of his history, summarize why he is unpopular among so many people, both in the UK and the Middle East.
Sure. So Tony Blair's unpopularity globally and within the UK largely stems from his role in the involvements in wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Both he and George Bush, throughout much of the 2000s, framed these wars as part of an effort to fight terror and to promote democracy. But in reality, these wars caused many, many thousands of civilian deaths and instability in those countries. Particularly in the case of Iraq, Blair was widely accused of misleading the public in the UK and international audiences as well, but taking British troops into Iraq without international or United Nations consensus, on the basis of the existence of weapons of mass destruction possessed by Saddam Hussein, weapons that never materialized. And since then, we've seen the thousands and thousands of deaths, but also the rise of militant groups, terrorist attacks. We've seen proxy warfare. We've seen, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, and a lot of that instability, is perceived to stem back to that war that Bush and Blair were largely responsible for. So since then, there's been calls for Blair to be indicted at the ICC. There was a major report in the UK, the Chilcot report, which found that Blair did mislead the public and the war was based on false intelligence. Now, since being Prime Minister, Blair has continued in his role in relation to the Middle East by being the Middle East envoy for the Quartet. The Quartet is the UN, the US, the EU, and Russia. And Blair was mostly in charge of overseeing the Israel-Palestine peace process as part of that role. He was seen as largely ineffective in this, and a lot of people in the region saw him as not an objective figure in these talks. And in more recent years, he's also been accused of meeting and sometimes advising autocratic figures linked to human rights abuses in the region, such as Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Mohammed bin Salman and others. The Tony Blair Institute has reportedly received millions of pounds from Saudi Arabia, and also works closely with Bahrain and the UAE. So there's a lot there for people in the region to be wary about Tony Blair's history with the Middle East.
So I know this is we have to make a distinction between Tony Blair's so-called Gaza International Transition Authority and Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan. Give us an overview of the hierarchy of Tony Blair's Gaza International Transitional Authority. At the top sits the board, which will be in charge of all appointments and supervise every component of the authority. It will be made up of between 7 and 10 members. What is the proposed degree of Palestinian representation?
Sure. So, as you said at the top of the question, there is a distinction to be made between Trump's 20-point plan and what was leaked to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz about Blair's plan for Gaza. Now, Tony Blair's name is mentioned in Donald Trump's 20-point plan, but the documents are different documents, and so what was leaked to Haaretz about this Gaza International Transitional Authority is slightly different to the Trump plan. Now, they could end up, being similar, and that we could see a world in which Trump takes on those recommendations, but we don't know that yet. But what we do know from what was leaked is that, yes, it will be called the Gaza International Transitional Authority, or GITA for short, and at the top of it will be an international board, which, according to the draft, will be made up of between 7 and 10 people. Now, a difference between the Trump plan and the leaked document is that there's been a lot of reporting that is suggesting that Tony Blair will be the chairman of this authority. Trump says in his plan that he will be the chairman of the Board of Peace. Now, if this Board of Peace and the International Board are the same thing, then we're not sure who the chairman is going to be. But according to this document, the board will sit at the top, and the board will be made up of international tycoons and billionaires, according to what's suggested in the plan, some diplomats, a UN figure, at least one Palestinian figure, preferably from the business or security sector, and some form of Muslim representation, whatever that means, not really that well spelled out. And they'll sit alongside the chairman, who will be kind of the international representative for Gaza in any kind of talks abroad. Now, underneath that, there'll be a number of technocratic roles in several sectors, such as humanitarianism, judiciary and legislation, security, and reconstruction. And then below that will be what has been described in this leaked document as a Palestinian Executive Authority, which is different to the Palestinian Authority. This will be a new body. It will be locally led by Palestinians. However, they won't have independent authority in the sense that they will be completely handpicked by these international billionaires and statesmen that will be in the board. And these Palestinian figures can be hired or fired at any time. You know, they'll have performance-based reviews. There's a lot of business-like language in this document, and they will be led by a Palestinian CEO. CEO is used in the document, not president, not prime minister, but CEO, and the head of the municipalities in charge of health and education and those such things won't be called ministers. They'll be called directors. So there's a clear view to depoliticizing any Palestinians that will be involved in this project. You know, there's a repeated use in both the Trump plan and the Blair plan of words like apolitical and neutral, and the fact that so much business-like language is used shows that that's the case.
You mentioned that billionaires and ardent Zionists figure strongly among those suggested by Blair to fill many positions on the board. You also note questionable affiliations of some of them, for example, being connected to settler projects and such. Who are few of the most notable?
Sure. Again, I have to note once again that the plan, the Tony Blair plan that was leaked to Haaretz, mentioned some names, but they mentioned them as suggestions of people that might be suggestions to be involved in this board. Whether any of the people mentioned in that document have actually been approached or have any knowledge of this plan, we don't know. But I can say who is mentioned. So one of the names mentioned is Mark Rowan as a potential member of this international board. He is an American billionaire worth around 10 billion. He owns a massive private equity company called Apollo Global Management. He describes himself as a proud supporter of Israel, and he's described what's happening in Gaza now as a just war. He's donated, along with his wife, I believe they donated $1 million to the Trump campaign in 2020. And he was, in fact, also reportedly interviewed to be Trump's Treasury Secretary. So has a very close relationship with Trump. Another name that's mentioned as a suggestion for someone who could be involved in the international board is Aryeh Lightstone. So he is reportedly heavily involved in the creation of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the US and Israeli-backed aid distribution mechanism that has been highly controversial, criticized by aid groups and the UN, accused of complicity and even direct involvement in crimes in Gaza. A huge number of Palestinians have either been killed or wounded while waiting at some of these aid sites. Lightstone was also a senior advisor to David Friedman when he was the US ambassador to Israel during Trump's first term. And he's also the CEO of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute and was reportedly heavily involved in the accords themselves, which are the normalization deals that Trump oversaw between Israel and a number of Arab countries during Trump's first term. Lightstone has been a sharp critic of the UN and, according to Haaretz, has been quite involved in post-war Gaza planning in cooperation with the White House. Now, another name that's been mentioned in the document as a potential figure, maybe this is one of the kind of Arab or Muslim figures, is Naguib Sawiris, who is a prominent Egyptian billionaire worth around 10 billion, comes from a family of tycoons. His businesses are mostly in the telecommunications and technology sectors in Egypt. And he's actually got a very long-standing relationship with Tony Blair that goes back many, many years. And finally, the final name that's mentioned as a potential figure in this board is Sigrid Kaag, who she was a senior humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for the UN in Gaza from late 2023 until earlier this year. She's a former government minister in the Netherlands and has held like UN roles in the region, Beirut, Damascus, and Jerusalem, I believe. But yes, I must stress again, these are suggested names. We don't know if these people have been approached. These UN figures in particular, whether they would be on board in having their name associated with this sort of Blair plan remains to be seen.
Right. There is a mention of a token Palestinian executive authority further down the hierarchy. Are the Palestinians teased out from the most significant development and financial work of the authority where the most impactful decisions are going to be made?
Sure. I think I mostly already answered this question earlier. It would appear so. It would appear that the Palestinian Executive Authority is much lower down the pecking order. There's actually an institutional organization diagram in the leaked document that you can specifically see them far below the board and the chairman and the various technocratic supervisors. So it would appear that they are down the hierarchy. However, there is talk of at least one Palestinian figure being on the board, and it remains to be seen. There seems to be, as I mentioned, a real the direction of the document seems to point towards business. So if there are Palestinian business figures that are on board with the plans, that are deemed to be neutral and apolitical, maybe they'll be further up the pecking order in this organization, but all of this remains to be seen.
The plan is dependent on a United Nations Security Council mandate. You note that nominations have to pass through the members of the Security Council, and that it is likely that there are some who could take issue with the Palestinians being excluded from playing a key role in the authority. Talk about this.
Sure. So again, this is another thing that is suggested in the leaked document, but we're really not sure because Trump's plan, his 20-point plan that he set out, doesn't mention UN backing or anything to do with the Security Council. And now the Blair document does, but whether any such plans are going to be dependent on the UN, a lot of what Israel and the US have done in Gaza over the past few years, and indeed for many years in Palestine, has been done on its own accord without any kind of, in fact, a lot of it has breached, UN resolutions. So it's very doubtful to what extent the UN Security Council or any other UN bodies will have in this plan. However, yes, the leaked document to Haaretz suggests that the international board would report to the UN Security Council, which would ultimately grant it authority. If you look at the current makeup of the Security Council, it includes non-permanent members such as Algeria, Pakistan, Slovenia. Permanent members include Russia and China. Some of these countries have been quite critical of Israeli actions in Gaza, and whether they, as a Security Council, would be on board with this sort of Trump, Tony Blair plan, we'll have to wait and see on that. It was very interesting that the Security Council was mentioned widely in this leaked document. Now, whether these countries approve of it or not, does it mean it will happen or won't happen? I think the last few years have shown us that, a lot of things can happen led by the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump without any kind of say from the UN.
Let's talk about the money. The money to fund this should be considerable. Did they talk about a budget for the first 3 years, and where is it being sourced from?
Yeah, so there's some talk of budget in this leaked document. There was talk of $90 million in the first year, 134 million in the second year, and 164 million in the third. There's not much talk of exactly where it's going to come from. But what they do say is that these costs are solely management expenses. It's to do with the running of this infrastructure that they've created for this authority, but it has nothing to do with aid or reconstruction in Gaza, which is going to need much, much more money than those figures. When it comes to those bigger, larger costs for reconstruction and aid, one would imagine that there will be some sort of international fundraising, which will involve the likes of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey and other actors in the region, possibly the European Union too. But we're very far from that stage. We're very far from anything being finalized with regards to post-war governance and reconstruction, particularly with the war still happening. People are still dying today. 60 people died yesterday, were killed yesterday by Israeli forces. I do expect there to be international involvement when it comes to fundraising, but we're far from having these conversations just yet.
Who's in charge of security enforcement? Israel always wants to be in charge of security enforcement, but who is earmarked to do it, and how willing will they be if they are from, let's say, other Arab and Muslim countries like Indonesia, as proposed?
Mm-hmm. So this is somewhere where Trump's plan and the leaked document linked to Tony Blair align. Both of them speak of an international stabilization force that in this interim period would be in charge of security in Gaza, overseen once again by the board and the chairman. But this force will be in charge of the border areas, the crossings, the Rafah crossing, and also in cracking down on terror infrastructure and the resurgence of any militant groups in the enclave. There isn't much by way of specifics as to who will be involved in this force, probably because not many countries have explicitly agreed to be part of it yet. Now, there was a plan by the Arab League that was led by Egypt a few months ago for post-war governance in Gaza, which spoke of Egypt and Jordan overseeing the training of Palestinian police forces in preparation for their deployment in post-war Gaza. That is what a lot of countries in the region were expecting a plan to look like, but there's not much talk of that in Trump or Blair's document, so we don't really know. You mentioned Indonesia. Yes, Indonesia said at the UN during a speech that it is willing to offer peacekeeping forces in Gaza, but under UN authorization of such a mission, which we obviously don't have yet. So I think it's another wait and see in terms of which countries will be involved. I think it will depend on how these talks progress for us to see more countries coming forward and actually putting their name to something like this.
What are some of the other bizarre aspects of this proposal that we haven't covered?
Sure. I think we've covered most of it, to be honest. I think the thing I found most interesting, which I've already mentioned, is the business element. To me, it kind of reminded me of the East India Company, an example of a country or a territory being run, as if it was the stock market. You have a chairman, you have a board. We're calling it a board. Um, you have a Palestinian CEO, and then you have directors, and the language used is businesslike. They talk of hiring and firing. They talk of performance reviews. Uh, it's I suppose Donald Trump, has always seen himself as a businessman. That is what he was before he was a president. And so maybe it's not a surprise that a plan that's so linked to him will use such business terminology. But Palestine and Gaza is a place where politics and history and the Palestinian narrative isn't about business. It's a very, very old territory with so many different civilizations, so many different stories, and to strip that to this apolitical, neutral body um, that is just focused on business and that has the involvement of all these billionaires, whether something like that will get approval from ordinary Palestinians, that we really have to see and speak to them.
You live in London, and what's the reaction been? I mean, to Tony Blair's name being recirculated in such a prominent place. I'm talking about maybe the British government and the British public when it comes to Tony Blair.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the British government, we have a Labour government at the moment whose politics are probably not that far away from Tony Blair, um, and they've of course welcomed Trump's plan. They haven't spoken much about Tony Blair's plan. I guess Tony Blair's plan is based on reporting rather than anything official, so they haven't felt the need to speak necessarily on that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're pretty supportive of the plan. Now, as for the public, I'm not sure if there's been any polling done, but um, from my anecdotal evidence, from just seeing on social media and looking at headlines and speaking to people, the idea of Tony Blair being some kind of leader in Gaza is rather strange. I think Jeremy Corbyn was likened it to him being Viceroy Blair, as if we were in the British Raj in India. People comparing it to the British Mandate in Palestine. A lot of people have been talking about the language of the document as seeming colonial, given Britain's past in Palestine and Britain's past in the Middle East and the whole world in general when it comes to empire. So people are quite confused as to what Tony Blair is doing, uh, his name even being mentioned in this.
Hmm. And final question. Trump's initial peace plan was 21 points. Then, when he presented it with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, it was reduced to 20 points. President Trump emphasized the wide-scale support by many countries, a lot of Arab and supposedly Muslim countries, for his plan. But was the plan they supported the same one that was presented in the joint press conference he held with Netanyahu?
It appears not. So Middle East Eye has reported earlier this week, and we spoke to sources in several different countries in the region. Um, a lot of these governments, officials in the region have been caught off guard by key changes in the proposal, and what Trump announced appears to be different to what was being discussed with some of these countries a few weeks ago. And some of the differences that they cited to us, one of which was the phased Israeli withdrawal um, from Gaza. That was not something that was discussed a few weeks ago. And the document, the 20-point plan, is very vague around deadlines, around consequences. If deadlines aren't met, and the deadlines don't even exist, it doesn't say how long this withdrawal will take. And Israeli withdrawal is predicated on groups in Gaza no longer posing a threat to Israel. Now, how that will be quantified is ambiguous. Another thing that was a discrepancy was the number of Palestinian prisoners to be released as part of a prisoner exchange. The numbers involved appear to be different to what was being discussed a few weeks ago. And also in terms of aid, there was a draft proposal discussed, more recently that spoke of a minimum of 600 aid trucks per day. No such commitments are made. There is talk of kind of unimpeded access for aid into Gaza, but without these kind of firm numbers, we really don't know how much aid will get into Gaza. Also, this board of peace, this international board, it appears to cut out a lot of these international actors and business people and some of the figures that we discussed that are being suggested to be part of it. They seem to be prioritized, whereas Arab Muslim countries in the region that have been involved in negotiating with the US and have also come up with their own plan for what post-war Gaza should look like. They seem to be completely cut out from this board of peace. So they brought that up as well. With regards to the International Stabilization Force, as I mentioned earlier, the Egypt plan spoke of Egyptian and Jordanian authorities overseeing some kind of training of Palestinian police forces that would then be deployed in Gaza. That doesn't seem to be mentioned. And there's a fear that this international stabilization force may have Israeli input, which is not something that these countries envisage. So there does seem to be quite a lot of differences.
Well, Rayhan Uddin, thank you for coming on Arab Talk and sharing your insights with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's the voice in the face of Rayhan Uddin talking about the leaked Tony Blair scheme to recreate Gaza as the head of the Gaza International Transitional Authority. It's so disturbing, Jamal. Yeah, I mean, where do we begin with Tony Blair, his kind of really disturbing history in relation to Palestine when he was prime minister in the UK, and now he's back at trying to create this real estate bonanza. I mean, it is different, as you said, between the Trump plan, but we know that Trump is sending Jared Kushner and Witkoff to do the negotiations. Who knows what's going to happen? But the Blair plan and Blair's participation is very disturbing.
Well, he was mentioned in the plan, Donald Trump's press conference, basically, and his claim to fame, or I should say, his claim to notoriety, is the war on Iraq, not Palestine. Palestine, I mean, basically, it was a reward from George W. Bush to just keep collecting a salary for 8 years as the head of the quartet, going back and forth for basically nothing. He just was getting paid for 8 years and with zero outcome. Anyway, let's delve into Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza. It's a long plan. This is, as you've mentioned, has been accepted by Hamas as agreed to release the remaining hostages, but Hamas says it's seeking further negotiations on a number of points. I don't know if I can go through the whole point. People can read it, but some of the main points, Jess, the number one point that they put in the plan is that Gaza will be de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. And my question about how about de-radicalizing Israelis, especially the 800,000 plus illegal settlers in the West Bank who attack Palestinians on a daily basis, burn their homes and their trees and their farms and steal their sheep. I mean, where is the balance in that? And then Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Supposedly the war will end immediately, and there are
That hasn't happened.
that
There's
hasn't
still
happened, but supposedly, I don't think President Trump is happy about that. I saw a report today that some leaked information that he was really angry with Benjamin Netanyahu, but that's another discussion. And of course, Hamas has to, within 72 hours. The 72 hours have passed. But Hamas said, of publicly accepting the agreement that all hostages alive and deceased will be returned, and they said they're working on it. And then there is of course, Palestinians in exchange. Prisoners have to be released, and the good news about this plan, I mean, I shouldn't say it's good news. Shouldn't have been even mentioned before, but there is no talk about getting rid of Palestinians or transferring Palestinians from Gaza. So they say that people who wants to stay will stay in Gaza. People who wants to leave and come back, they can come back. I mean, that's at least. And then there is the
but,
component about
Jamal,
humanity.
right. Why would anybody believe anything that Netanyahu and Trump say about Gaza and Palestine? Can we just put out a couple of major points? Number one, Hamas really, in terms of their negotiating style, was they made a really brilliant political move in terms
I
of
don't
saying,
think so. I disagree with you about
okay, well,
this.
we can get to that.
Brilliant, but
No, and we'll have a good discussion about that. Whatever the political dynamics of Hamas doing this, we can talk about it. But on the other side, why would anybody believe Netanyahu and Trump? We spoke about this last week. We have this plan that was put forth. Ostensibly, Hamas has agreed to it. It's not clear entirely what the further negotiating points. We know that Witkoff and Kushner are going to do the negotiations at this point, but in reality, and Palestinians are still being killed in Gaza, and the aid is not being let in the way it needs to be. So my question is, why would anybody believe this rubbish? Is there any reason to believe?
well, because it's the only offer on the table, and it's the only offer that will basically end the killing of Palestinians if it works. If it works.
But it's not working.
It's just 72 hours, so we don't know what's going to happen. So I don't want to kind of predict the outcome. I mean, the outcome could be exactly what you're saying, but it hasn't happened yet. And, the answer about Hamas, doing such a brilliant move, well, they could have done such a brilliant move a year ago or more than a year ago and so forth, because since 2 years now, the official number is close to 70,000 Palestinians who have been killed, but the unofficial number, which we'll find out later on, and should this peace plan succeeds and human rights organizations, NGOs, etc., enter Gaza, and then we'll find out the number is more like 200,000, because you and I spoke over almost a year ago that with the Lancet report said 180,000.
Exactly.
And then of course there are all these Palestinians who will die afterwards as an effect. But anyway, that's kind of some of the conditions. But the discussion of with our guest earlier today is basically centered around item 9 on this peace plan, which is how Gaza will be governed. Gaza will be under the temporary transitional governors of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. And the committee will have some Palestinians, but international experts. And who are the international experts? That's the big question. Of course, no. It's Tony Blair plays a prominent role.
Right.
That's the whole thing. I mean, the head of it is still it's called the Board of Peace. Will be the President Trump, and then it filters down. President Trump. I mean, he's the president of the United States. He has to run an entire country with a million problems. So he's not going to be hands-on, and that's why my feeling would be, aside from it's his plan and he's the ultimate person in charge, all work will filter through Tony Blair, and
Right,
that's the kind of the big question mark with the history of Tony Blair's involvement in the Iraq War, with his failure 8 years to negotiate a peace agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis and getting paid for it. That's the big question mark, is why Tony Blair? I mean,
Well,
that's
we know why Tony Blair, because Tony Blair is going to act in the best interests of himself and the Israeli government. He has nothing in terms of, based on his track record and what we know about him and his public and leaked statements. He's not in this to give any kind of respect or dignity or kind of genuine engagement of Palestinians in this process, Jamal. Anybody who believes that is frankly has either drank the Kool-Aid or is a bit delusional. I think among all the people who are most terrible to be in this position, Tony Blair would be at the top, Witkoff, Kushner, the whole gang of three. This is not in the Palestinian interest. The only thing that's in the Palestinian interest right now, Jamal, is two things: stop the bombing and the killing of innocent civilians and letting food, water, and medicine in. That's the only thing that must be absolutely and unequivocally negotiated and initiated immediately. After that, I mean, I understand that people are kind of glad that this is happening, but nothing is done until it's done, Jamal. And there's still strikes, there's still missile attacks, there's still starvation in Gaza. I know it's early on in the so-called agreement, but it's hard to really be optimistic in the midst of all these things.
Yeah, you could look at it this way. Again, the number one reason to have this thing work is to stop the killing, because
Exactly.
every single day 100 Palestinians die. That's the average number recently.
Right.
Even when President Trump put on his social media asking Netanyahu to stop the bombing, Israel continued to bomb, and Palestinians died. And that's why I saw a report that Trump was very upset with Netanyahu. And we have to see if he's going to force him to stop this killing and this madness. I mean, if Hamas accepted the deal, and I understand, well, releasing the hostages, that's going to be happening, and 72 hours might not be enough, and that's to be negotiated. And then there are other details, because how Israel is going to withdraw from Gaza, they're going to try to create their own security zones, and they're talking about this, and that's going to be the sticking point. But if you're going to have this plan and put it under kind of an international umbrella with these, there are talks about bringing Indonesian forces to monitor the situation in Gaza, and maybe others will be involved, like Jordan and Egypt. Why do you need Israel's security? Why do you need the Israelis there who are going to antagonize the population and kill the population? I mean, you're trying to defuse the situation, and if Hamas agrees to disarm, and then you're creating this umbrella of technocrats to run the country, aside from what are the motives of Tony Blair and others. And of course, we see a very little role for the Palestinians, or later on the Palestinian Authority, after the Palestinian Authority in the things mentioned reforms itself, then they'll be involved.
Whatever that means.
Well, then the question, are the people in Gaza going to accept the Palestinian Authority? Because they didn't accept the Palestinian Authority when Hamas took over. So that's another question. I mean, and who's going to control Gaza, aside from the international committee later on? So there are a lot of details, but the most important detail, the Israelis should not be involved.
100%. That's 100% correct. Three things should be done immediately. As I said before, stop the bombing, stop the killing and the genocide in Gaza, let food, water, and medicine in. And exactly, Jamal, the Israelis do not have a need to be operating or being involved in any aspect of what happens in Gaza, full stop. But here's the problem, Jamal. Nobody believes Israel. No one believes Netanyahu. Nobody believes that. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. I don't believe this kind of creative, social media campaign. Oh, Trump is so upset with Netanyahu. We've heard that a million times, Jamal, how upset Trump is with Netanyahu. But Israel and Netanyahu get to do whatever they do whenever they want still, despite all this. So I don't buy the fact that, oh, Trump is so upset. I don't think he really cares, to be honest. So I'm sorry to be not as optimistic as maybe some people are. I mean, the fact that less blood is going to be shed and that there could be a ceasefire and that there could be food and water coming in to the starving children of Gaza is fantastic news. But the long-term idea that somehow we should trust the Israelis and Netanyahu to stop their brutality in Palestine, I don't see how any Palestinian could really buy that, Jamal. I don't see it.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, what's going to happen? It's on the table. Something's going to happen within the next few days because there is an ultimatum, by the way. Also, Trump came back and said if Hamas does not accept, then all hell will break loose.
By the way, he said that before.
And said it, and he repeated that. So that's also why I cannot go further into analyzing the details, because the most important thing is Israel stops the killing, and they can move to phase 2 and so forth. Now it's just like there is a plan, and that's the plan. We know the details of the plan, and let's see if it's going to work. We have a few minutes left. Just I want to comment on a few things, and I want to start with something we weren't going to talk about it, but this happened over the weekend. Is this Van Jones, who was on Bill Maher's show, making jokes about dead Palestinian babies?
Unbelievable.
And you have Bill Maher and Freeman from the New York Times giggling and laughing over his sick joke. And a few hours ago, he tweeted an apology, Van Jones, okay, which is better than no apology. However, what I'll have to say, that remark was so despicable, and the reason he tweeted an apology because of the reaction on social media and people expressing disgust with him. And the only thing I want to say, if he said the same thing about Israeli babies dying or Israeli children, he will not have a job.
Full stop.
And the fact that he has a job, he shouldn't appear on CNN. And I have a challenge for CNN. The way they fired Mark Lamont Hill for something ridiculous, in my opinion, because he didn't talk about killing Israelis or Israeli children or something about special children, innocent babies. He lost his job immediately. And if he appears on CNN, then you know where they stand. I mean, these are sick people, sick comments for just having a few minutes of laughs.
Well, Jamal, I think, I can't agree with you more. I think we need to take it a little further. This represents classic anti-Palestinian racism. He's a racist. He's racist against Palestinians and Palestinian children. As you rightly point out, if Van Jones had said this about Israeli children, or I dare say any other children, he would have lost his job immediately. The fact that he, Friedman, and Maher can get away with this grotesque display of racism against Palestinian and Palestinian children reflects what's happening right now. I stand with you and the hundreds of thousands of people who are demanding that Van Jones be fired immediately. He needs to be fired from CNN. He should never be able to be on air ever again spewing this racist, hateful rhetoric. And by the way, against children. So we're entering a new era. This is another reason, to go back to our original points, why nobody really trusts anything right now in terms of the so-called peace process, because you could see some of the rhetoric that is allowed to be said on national TV in the United States. It's really disgusting, Jamal.
It's really sick. And a reminder to Van Jones, there are more than 18,000 Palestinian children who have been killed. We have the largest number of children amputees in the entire world. We have now the largest number of orphans because of the war.
And the largest number of starving children per capita.
And not to mention about the famine and the starvation and the long-term effects. So to make light of this and to make a joke about he has to be totally demented, in my opinion, to say something like this.
Well, I think it's worse than dementia. I think he's just racist. He's part of this racist kind of group, Friedman and Maher included, that can get away with saying this stuff like that. And just to remind everybody, if he had said the same thing about any other children, he would be fired immediately. So he is allowed to get away with it. He should be fired unequivocally.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.